Good evening, everyone. Nice to see all of you again after 2 weeks of hiatus of Easter break. Hope you enjoyed your Easter break, getting refreshed in faith by the celebration of Easter and many things that are happening in our life. We have been concerned, of course, in Asia because of the developments in Myanmar getting worse, the pandemic as well. In many parts of Asia, it's getting worse. In India, I think it's getting worse, right? That's
Yeah,
what I heard from the media. In Indonesia, we have different earthquakes and different calamities, natural disasters in the eastern part of Indonesia. Just recently, in Manila as well, the hospitals are overwhelmed by patients. People are struggling for their life. So on that note, we try to move along our plan with the course. We are trying to deepen our knowledge and our immersion into the world of Catholic interreligious dialogue. This time, I try to offer you the experience, the model of dialogue by two great pioneers of dialogue in the Catholic world, Louis Massignon, a French intellectual, and Thomas Merton, an American Trappist monk who is very well known in the world as an activist, as a pioneer in Catholic, Buddhist, monastic dialogue, and so forth, who also enjoyed very warm relationship and friendship with Massignon. So I hope you try to get a grasp of the reading, but if you don't read it, the whole article, I think it doesn't really matter. We can come back to the reading later when you have time. So let me share the, the slides that I have prepared. So this is our topic today, tonight, prayer, fasting, and friendship in dialogue, with the example of Thomas Merton and Louis Massignon, two great pioneers of dialogue in the Catholic world in the West, dialoguing with the East, with Islam, with Buddhism, with Zen Buddhism, and so forth. And this is something that is important, I think. We have by now learned about different models of dialogue of life, dialogue of theological reflection, dialogue of action, dialogue of prayer. And this falls into dialogue of prayer, of mystical experience, but also of fasting and also friendship. And it's a happy coincidence that yesterday or today, actually, in some of the parts of the Muslim world, Muslims started to fast today. So it would be interesting to see how Louis Massignon, for example, as you can see from the reading, tried to use fasting and prayer as a means of dialogue on a deeper level, on the level of spirituality, on the level of the heart meeting another heart in friendship with the Muslims, with the Muslim world, with other persons. Of course, you might know Thomas Merton better, I guess, because he's more well known in the English-speaking world. Louis Massignon is not really well known because of the nature of his work in France and so forth. And Thomas Merton published this very famous autobiography in the 60s, I would guess, The Seven-Story Mountain, an autobiography of faith. It was a bestseller for many, many years in America. People learn about monasticism, about the beauty of monastic calling as a Trappist because of Merton's work. They saw his vocation as a beautiful vocation in the world that was back then awash in wars, in nuclear competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, a world beset by conflicts. He left the world and to enter the solitude and silence of a monastic life setting in Kentucky, the United States. So this was a very well-known event for the Catholic world in the 60s. So let's try to understand the friendship between the two great leaders of dialogue here. When I was teaching in the United States, in Boston, I used this work, Thomas Merton, his autobiography, and I put it side by side with the autobiography of Elizabeth Gilbert, Eat, Love, and Pray. And then the students, we read the works in 2 weeks side by side, and we compare the journey of the two people. And to my surprise, a lot of my students actually liked the journey of Thomas Merton better than the journey of Elizabeth Gilbert, more or less their contemporary. This is a quite young American woman who got divorced and then went into this search for meaning in India, in Italy, and Indonesia. You know the movie, of course, Eat, Pray, and Love, right? So let's start with Louis Massignon, the older guy in the friendship here. He was born in 1883, 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, and he died in 62. He was a French intellectual. This is his picture. He went to the Middle East. He immersed himself in the world of Islam. He donned, putting on this kind of robe, Islamic attire. He was a pioneer of Catholic Muslim dialogue, and he was influential in Vatican II. Nostra Aetate, the work that we studied early in our course, actually was under his influence. He was actually the man behind that kind of spirit of Nostra Aetate, the positive view of Islam from the Catholic world. So this was the young Massignon. He was born in Paris from a pious Catholic mother. His father was an artist, a sculptor, and his father inspired him to study further. But his mother inspired him to be a good Catholic, but for the most part during his childhood and I think adolescence, he left the Catholic faith. He became agnostic actually. And then he studied geography and cartography of Africa, North Africa. As you know, the French state had a colony there, Algeria and so forth, right? And so it was natural for him to study Africa, and then he came to know Islam from his travel in Morocco. And then he studied Islam, Islamic saint, in particular this guy named Mansur al-Hallaj, who played an important role in bringing him back from his agnosticism to Catholic faith. This is surprising, and this is so unique in this sense. A Catholic boy, actually, he was born and raised a Catholic, but he lapsed in his faith. And then he came back to Catholic faith with more fervor, with more enthusiasm, with more depth because of an Islamic saint. I will show you the depiction of the saint. This is Mansur al-Hallaj, a Muslim saint, a 10th century, who was hung in Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate back then. He was put to death because of his kind of unorthodox, to a certain degree, according to some people, teaching. He said that Anna al-Haq in Arabic, it means I am the real, I'm the truth, because he felt this unification with the Lord, with God. So when he speaks, it seems that God himself speaks. So he is so united with God, and he utters, he speaks out about his experience, mystical experience, and it was deemed unorthodox, and he was put to death here by hanging. Now, the guy, his mysticism, he suffered, right? Massignon was in love with this guy because for him, the law of the cross, like the one he found in Catholicism, can also be found in Islam in the figure of this martyr, Mansur al-Hallaj. He died for his love of God. And then he studied this guy, came out as his dissertation work, got published, and then he came into a deeper relationship with Islam through the presence of this guy. So it's not just an academic exercise. It was not just an academic study of the work of Al-Hallaj, but rather the spiritual presence of Al-Hallaj himself. Al-Hallaj is still present because he's a saint, a wali, and he has this spiritual presence. And Massignon got to know him on that level as well. Okay, I think I don't have much time to talk about this experience, but we will come back later. We have time. And he also got to know Charles de Foucault, the Catholic now saint or blessed. He of origin, and then he lived among Muslims in North Africa, in Taman Rasset in Algeria. He lived and worked among the Muslim, and he loved Islam and the Muslim. This is the guy. And he lived like a hermit, very simple, in the desert of Algeria in Taman Rasset. Very simple man, but very holy. And the Pope, I think, is making him a saint soon. And then he participated in archaeological mission in Mesopotamia, in Iraq, and lived in Baghdad. And he had mystical experience with God through Al-Hallaj, who visited him, who brought him back to Catholic faith, as I mentioned. And then he also met with Mohandas Gandhi and was inspired by Gandhi, especially during the Algerian War. Massignon opposed the war as a pacifist. He had this non-violent stance on the issue of France-Algeria conflict. And then he got that from Gandhi. And then in 1934, he founded Badalia. This is a very interesting sodality or prayer group, actually. It's called Badalia. Badalia means substitution. He founded the sodality with Mary Cahill, his friend, an Egyptian, I think. It's a religious movement dedicated to prayer and fasting on the part of Arabophone Christians who speaks Arabic in the Middle East and elsewhere, on behalf of the Muslims under whose political control they live. So they pray for Muslims. They fast for the benefits of Muslim people. So this is something rare, that we have a sodality of prayer, but we pray and we fast. We do ascetic practices, not on our own behalf, not for our own benefit, but for the benefits of the Muslims. So we substitute ourselves for them. We offer ourselves for their well-being. So this is a very noble spirit in dialogue. Again, this is Charles de Foucault, a man that Massignon admires. According to many people, according Father Sidney Griffith, whose article you have with you for this meeting tonight, Father Sidney Griffith teaches in the United States, and he is an expert of Islam, a Catholic priest. And then he said the single most influential about Massignon as the single most influential figure in the 20th century in regard to the church's relationship with Islam. So this is an important person. And he was influential in Vatican II, as I mentioned. And then he had 3 cycles in his involvement with Islam. The first is Halajian cycle in relation to his experience with Al-Halaj. And then the cycle of Abraham, the father of faith for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And then the Gandhian cycle. Let's see what happens during each cycle later, right? But at this point, I want to say something about the conversational nature of Louis Massignon's Catholic faith. It was conversational. His faith develops through conversations. It was in and through his dialogue with Islamic texts, traditions, practices, and persons, through friendships with persons, that Massignon established his understanding of Catholic and Islamic faith. So he develops his faith. His faith develops in relation, in tandem with his dialogue with Islamic texts and so forth, and practices and persons as well. So in dialogue, we grow our faith. We are growing in our faith as a Catholic through dialogue. This is one of the things that we have to learn from the great figure like Louis Massignon here. And then in general, Louis Massignon did not judge Islam negatively, but loving Islam with all his lucidity as a scholar and Christian, by resituating Islam as a Christian under a light which does not judge but fulfills. So for him, Islam is good for the most part, but fulfillment happens in the Catholic faith. This is the view of Vatican II, right? As we remember. Massignon at times, though, still judges Islam. For example, he rejects Quranic denial of the incarnation. So Massignon is also realistic. He adheres to the truth of Catholic faith, but is still open to Islam. And with regard to Islam, he has positive view for the most part, but at times he has to deliver his judgments as well. For example, about the crucifixion, about the incarnation, which the Quran denied, right? Now, the cycles of Massignon's involvement with Islam, as I mentioned, there are 3 of the cycles. The first is Halajian cycle, which consists of judgment, like that. And then the Abrahamic cycle, it's based on understanding Islam, not judging Islam, but understanding Islam. And here are the points that Louis Massignon put for us. First, Abraham is a symbol of Christian-Muslim fraternity. I think this is not controversial. We know that, but he values the figure of Abraham as the figure of unification, fraternity between Islam and Christianity. And then he is very clear about this, that the God of Islam is the God of Judaism and Christianity. This is something that can be revolutionary given the context. Back then, people were still doubtful that we actually, Muslims and Christians actually worship the same God. And in Malaysia, we discussed during this course here and then, the problem of naming God. Christians are barred at some point to name God Allah because they feel that this is not the same God. The Muslims in Malaysia, for the most part, they would consider Christian God and Muslim God to be different. But Massignon, and this becomes the view of Vatican II as well, believes that actually the God of Islam is the same as the God of Judaism and the God of Christianity. And Muhammad is a worse sincere and can be called a negative prophet, a prophet who challenges Christianity. That's why it's called negative prophet. Negative in the sense of challenging. So he values the Prophet Muhammad as a true prophet, but as a negative prophet, more or less. And the Quran is, in some sense, inspired and can be said to maintain a conditional authority. For him, the Quran is inspired by God. He didn't reject the Quran, and then it can be said, he said that the Quran has a conditional authority. An authority, but it is conditional. It is not total. Why? Because at the end of the day, the Quran does not accept the salvific role of Christ, right? So as Christians, we cannot accept the total authority of the Quran as God's revelation, but it is inspired by God, but it has this conditional authority for us. Back then, this kind of idea was quite revolutionary. Islam has a positive mission in salvation history, and the Arabic language has a special vocation. So Islam functions positively for Christians in the salvation history as a challenge to purify the faith, to purify the ethical practices of Christians, for example. Islam and Islamic mysticism, prayer, experience with God, encountering the God of Abraham, pose a challenge for purity of the Christian faith. So it seems to us that for Massignon, Islam functions as a critic, a negative critic, but still something that Christian faith needs. I hope you understand that kind of point. Islam and Christianity differ in many ways, but Islam can function as a negative prophet, as a critic of Christianity to grow, to purify itself. That was the Abrahamic cycle, where Massignon tried to understand Islam on a deeper level. And then the Gandhian cycle, it's based on decision and love. It's action against the war with Muslims, because for Massignon, the Algerian-French war was actually a war between Catholics, the French Catholics, against the Muslim Algerians. So for Massignon, he was so opposed to the war, and then he learned from Gandhi that to love is actually to oppose that kind of violence. And the means of dialogue with Islam is the foundation of this Badalia sodality, where people come, they pray, and they fast, doing ascetic practices on behalf of Muslims for the benefits of the Muslims. And in the prayer as well, I participated in one of their sessions in Boston, in the United States, and they're using Muslim prayer, as I can remember. They recite prayers on Muslim saints for the edification of their souls. So during prayers, they actually use Islamic prayers and Islamic figures. This is something quite new, right, in the movement. And then Massignon was also interested in Trappist asceticism, because he was really keen on those things, asceticism, prayer, fasting, and so on. So Thomas Merton, who was a Trappist, as I mentioned, supported Massignon's anti-violence movement against the Algerian war. As we will learn later, Merton was also a pacifist. He opposed the war in Vietnam, the US-Vietnam War. As a Trappist monk and writer, he was a pacifist, and he was supporting Massignon as well. So these are two great figures of the Catholic dialogue with Islam and with the Eastern religion, with Buddhism, who were united in their fight against violence. Both are pacifist. They're against any type of war. And Merton believes in Massignon's dictum that salvation comes from those who are despised. For Massignon, salvation came from the most despised, the most rejected in society, like the Algerian people, as I mentioned. So he came to understand that even in Islam, suffering plays a role. It puts him into closer dialogue with Islam, because what he sees in Islam is also the role of the cross, which is so central in Christian faith. That's why he kind of came to know Islam on a very deep level. And salvation comes as a participation in the secret history, the law of the cross. Actually, for Massignon and Al-Hallaj, the history of humankind, our history, is governed by this secret of history, by the law of the cross. If you suffer, you can turn your suffering into this salvific moment. You can save others through your suffering. That's the law of history. According to Massignon and Al-Hallaj, you can save the world through your suffering. You can save other people. You can show your love through suffering. Suffering redeems. Suffering redeems the world. Suffering redeems friendship. Suffering redeems broken world. So this is the law of history, according to Massignon, learning from Al-Hallaj. That this is true in our world today, where suffering is and so on and so forth. And the nuclear war in the Middle East, Israelis are being accused of trying to destroy the Iranian nuclear establishment just now. And then Christian and Muslim saints actually, according to Massignon, participate without being aware in the secret of history. So we have Christian faith, we have Christian saints, we have Christian figures, but we also have Muslim figures and saints, and they're participating in this movement in history. That also participates in the work of Christ. So the work of Christ is done also by Muslim saints, because they also work for love. They also suffer because of their love. So they work for Christ actually. So, and then there's the spirituality of substitution. We offer ourselves, we all suffer in awareness that we are suffering in Asia, not just with Muslims, but with Buddhists in Myanmar, with many other people of different faiths. We can offer our fasting, our suffering on that sense, on that level, to those who suffer as well. So this is the figure of Al-Hallaj. And then Massignon also revives the pilgrimage to seven sleepers of Ephesus. This is the figures of seven sleepers, those young people during the persecution of what is called in history Diocletian era in Christian history, where Christians were persecuted by the Emperor Diocletian. And then these Christian guys went into hiding in this cave in Ephesus, in Turkey now. And then they slept for many centuries, for many years at least. And then when they woke up and they went to the city, they found out that the world was different now. Christianity was already the state religion. So they had freedom now. So they slept for many years. This was a miracle. God protected them in the cave. They're men of the cave. And their story was mentioned in the Quran. These are Christians, but their story of miracle of life was actually written in the Quran. So Massignon was drawn to that story. And then he revived that kind of tradition of pilgrimage, Muslim and Christian pilgrimage to Seven Sleepers. In the old days, we had a special day to commemorate the Seven Sleepers of Ephesus in our Roman Catholic calendar. But now it's no more, right? But still, they are recognized as holy figures in the Catholic faith, but also in the Quran. So Massignon used their figures, this kind of person, Muslim and Christian, so to speak, referred by Muslim and Christians as figures of dialogue. I went to that pilgrimage in Brittany, in France, in the south, on almost south, but not southwest, perhaps, of France. It was so memorable, that kind of Muslim Christian pilgrimage around the figures of seven sleepers of Ephesus. Now, in 10 minutes or so, I would like to discuss the figure of Thomas Merton, who lived in the earliest part of the first half of the 20th century, the last century. Unlike Massignon, actually, Thomas Merton was more immersed in dialogue with Buddhism, not with Islam, but he learned the value of dialogue, the spirit of dialogue, the friendship from Massignon as well. This is the iconography of Father Thomas Merton. He was here depicted as a Catholic Trappist monk, but in a Buddhist kind of position, right? The mudra of the Buddha is used here as a pattern for the holy kind of posture of this Catholic monk. Because he, again, immersed himself in the dialogue with Buddhism. He learned from the Buddhist tradition of prayer and fasting in the monastery, Buddhist monk. He went to Asia, actually, in 68, and he met with the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, I think, in northern India, his base. And then he had some kind of deep dialogue with the Dalai Lama. He was learning about Buddhism already in Kentucky, in his monastery in Louisville. But then he got this kind of invitation to tour Asia, and he produced a kind of publication, a diary during his journey in Asia. It's called the Asian Journal of Thomas Merton. He was a Trappist monk, a writer of spirituality and theology. You might have read some of his pieces. A peace activist, he was anti-Vietnam War and nuclear armament, and then he was also concerned about ecology. This is very early. Long before Laudato Si, Thomas Merton was already proposing that kind of spirituality that connects us more deeply with the natural world. He was interested in dialogue with Eastern religions, especially Zen Buddhism and Islam, through Louis Massignon. He traveled to Asia to have dialogues with Buddhist monks in 68, and he was praised by the Pope in 2015 when the Pope came to the Congress of the U.S. State, the U.S. Congress. He was given a chance to speak before the Congress of the United States, a very privileged space for a Pope to speak in a largely Protestant country, right? And he praised figures of Catholic faith there in America, including Thomas Merton. He said Thomas Merton was above all a man of prayer, a thinker who challenged the certitudes of his time and opened new horizons for souls and the church. He was also a man of dialogue, a promoter of peace between peoples and religions. So this is one of the ways in which the Pope praises Thomas Merton. and his role in our divided world today. This is from Pope Francis, his address to US Congress in 2015. And Father Thomas Merton developed his views on non-Catholics, non-Christians this way. He went through this evolution. When he wrote the Seven Storey Mountains, this work was written during his conversion period. He converted from agnosticism, communism even, to Catholic faith, and he joined a monastery. So the tone of his writing back then was too harsh on non-Catholics, because he was in that kind of period where he was converting to Catholic faith. So his faith was so radical, right? Not yet matured. Initial kind of a fervor of a convert. And then the church itself underwent a change in respect to other religions. As I mentioned, through the work of Louis Massignon, for example, the Vatican II was a watershed in the development of the Catholics, the Catholic theology regarding other religions. So valuing the goodness of other religions, but not stating that all religions are exactly the same, as Massignon would also agree. And then in the last few years before his death, in his religious quest, Merton immersed himself in the other religious traditions, more specifically Eastern religions, especially Zen Buddhism, Sufism, and Islam. He died in Bangkok in '68 during a trip of learning from these religions. He was giving a paper in '68 in Bangkok, of course, with the Buddhist monks in attendance. And he was planning on spending the Christmas season in that year, in Indonesia, because in Indonesia we have this Trappist monastery, and Merton planned to actually spend his Christmas time in that kind of monastery, in a Trappist monastery in Indonesia, not far from where I live, actually 2 hours away on the mountain. There's this Trappist monastery, but he died of electrocution, I think, in Bangkok. Thomas Merton learned from Buddhist monastic life. As a monk himself, Merton was drawn to learn from the monastic tradition of Buddhism. He said something like this: "I need not add that I think we have now reached a stage which is long overdue of religious maturity, at which it may be possible for someone to remain perfectly faithful to a Christian and Western monastic commitment, and yet to learn in depth from, say, a Buddhist discipline and experience." So this is a dialogue of monastic life. This is a dialogue of prayer. This is a dialogue of ascetic life. Buddhism is, of course, very rich in this regard, right? So there's no wonder that a man of like Thomas Merton is drawn to Buddhism to learn more about monastic commitments, about monastic life, being a monk, being a man of prayer and fasting. And then Thomas Merton was actually learning from Massignon. In the article that I sent to you, there were many points of context between Merton and Massignon. The most important one is on the notion of virginal point. What is it? Virginal point. Virginal point is the deepest recess of every human soul, where God has access to, where God resides. Actually, Massignon took that notion from Al-Hallaj, the Muslim saint that he loved and admired, that he studied, that He loved on the deeper level of spirituality, with whom he communed through his spiritual presence. Al-Hallaj said, "Our hearts are a virgin that God's truth alone opens." So within the hearts of every human being, there is this place for God, and only God can access that point. That is the virginal point. And Merton was so taken by this notion. He was a mystic. He prays a lot, and his spirituality was so deep. So naturally, he was drawn to that kind of notion where people can meet actually. People from across religious traditions have access to God because they have this virginal point in their life. And then virginal hearts also function as the meeting point between human persons. Merton can learn from Massignon, and we can learn from each other. We have friends, and friendship, true friendships, happens on the level of the meeting of hearts. Those virginal points in our hearts. The virginal point in our heart makes it possible for us to encounter the other deeply. And I quoted here a sentence from Father Sidney Griffith. But for both Merton and Massignon, in addition to their faith in Jesus Christ, their encounters, other their encounters with other people who had met God were also of great moment. And nowhere was this more the case than in their encounters with people of other religions. For both of them, other religions were other people, not just sets of other doctrines. That's why I emphasize in the title of this presentation tonight, friendship. You encounter other religions in your encounter with the followers, the believers, the members of that religion. Religion is concrete. It becomes manifest in the persons who are part of that religious tradition. And we need that kind of virginal hearts to have friendship with them. So this is the importance of the category of virginal heart. We are not just seeing them from afar, they become strangers for the most part, but we become friends with them because we open our hearts to them, like the way Massignon fostered friendship with a lot of his Muslim friends. So I close with these questions for us. What do you think of the role of fasting and prayer or mystical experience in dialogue? Is it useful? Does it work in your case? For example, have you ever thought of doing prayer and fasting in dialogue, especially during this season of fasting? For those of us who live in a Muslim country, for example, who have Muslim friends. And what do you think of the role of friendship in dialogue? Any personal experience in this regard? Do you feel that you are very close to your friends on that deepest level of the virginal points in our hearts, like the one experienced by Merton and Massignon with their friends?